listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. I'm your host, Val. So excited to have you join in this conversation today between me and my friend, Erica Eich. Erica and I have known each other almost 4 years now, since about the time that we moved here and I reached out to her about our Azure Standard order drop location, all the things. She was coordinator, and kind of communication back and forth since then. 4 years later, here we are recording an episode on the podcast. You are going to love this episode, and not just because she's a very near and dear friend of mine, but because her answers were so profound and so straight from the heart. I really think that you will appreciate what she has to share, whether this is your journey or not. She shares her own perspective so eloquently. Let's hop into this episode with my friend, Erica. All right, I am here with, I'm just going to say it, she's one of my besties right here in town, Erica Eich. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Val?
I'm fantastic. We've been
Great.
talking for it was like, well, we should probably hit record. So I'm going to ask you, you know that I start every episode with ages and stages of kids and where you are in motherhood. So why don't you tell my listeners about the ages of your kids and the stage of motherhood you are currently in?
Well, I would consider myself in the middles and littles stage is kind of, I guess, how I would put it. My oldest is 12 and my youngest is almost 5 months old. So we've got quite a range. I have 6 kids. I don't know if I said that. So we've got a whole bunch of middles and littles. So
And you have 3 boys, 3 girls.
Yes.
Right now it's a perfect split. Okay, so before I get too much into your motherhood, I just want to say we met, we are both, what would you say, transplants to South Dakota?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
And we met because you handle all things Azure Standard for the local drop for us. And I think I emailed you. I was like, hey, where is this? Because we just
How does this work?
Yeah. Right. And so I've been ordering from Azure for years, which I think there's always a link in the description to Azure Standard if you don't know what I'm talking about. Then I think at one time at one of the drops, I was kind of like, you're a hero for doing this. And anyone who says otherwise can pound sand. And then I don't know if it was the very next drop. So it would have been like the next month or something. You were like, hey, would you ever be interested in being a part of our homeschool co-op? And I was like, I could maybe cry, but I'm not going to cry in front of her. And I'll just be like, sure.
Yeah. So you and I had chatted a little bit off and on at the different drops and stuff. And so I knew you had 2 kids and their relative ages, and we were looking for one of the kids in our co-op didn't have somebody in one of those age ranges. And so I was like, oh, they're homeschoolers and maybe they would want to join us. And so, and it worked out really well.
It did.
So
I'm very thankful you asked me that day. It's like we were both hauling, 50-pound bags of something
of all kinds of things
off the truck. Yeah. So I know that you and your husband have been together since forever.
Yeah, 16. We started dating in high school. He sat next to me in our history class. So, and we started dating then and have been together ever since.
And never stopped.
Never stopped dating. Yep.
So you guys have 6 kids now. Did you know when you were either next to him in history class or next to him at the altar saying I do, did you know a big family was going to be in the cards for you?
So he comes from a family of 4 and I come from a family of 4. And so that was always my number. My number was 4. It just that was what I wanted. He was like, I don't think he really cared. And
Hmm.
it was like, 4, yep, that makes sense. And so that was more along the lines of what we thought. And then, I don't know, life happens and things change and hearts change. And our family just kind of grew a little bigger than the 4. So
So do you think you have a number now, or is it more of just kind of what unfolds in life?
I think at this point it's kind of what unfolds. I don't I'm not 100% a person who believes that like I don't need all of the children. Like I don't need 15 children to be holier than thou or anything.
Yeah.
But it's kind of just been like one kid at a time. And
Yeah.
um, after our second was born, he was a very hard, very fussy baby, and we were both kind of like, maybe we had one girl, one boy, and it was kind of like maybe that's a good place to stop. And but time went on, and our hearts changed and softened, and so we decided to keep going.
I,
Yeah, and now we have 6.
and I love the big story or the big family stories. I went from like not being sure I ever wanted children to saying, you know, I wanted 4 and then delivering
Yeah.
3 and then keeping
Yeah.
2. And so I'm all about telling people you have all the babies that
Yeah.
you can have. Like,
Yeah.
that's why, honestly, that's why I asked you that question. And this interview is going to be so different from others because, you know, I talk to you every single day.
Yes.
And so, but I don't talk to you about this kind of stuff. So
For
this will
sure.
be different.
Yeah.
But also, like, I know that I can tell you anything. So I'm just saying, I asked you that question on purpose in hopes that you would say you didn't have a number, because I would love to encourage people, don't set a number. Just,
yeah. Well, and
just,
it's funny because I remember like there were we are homeschoolers. Both my husband and I were both homeschooled most of the way through. We did a couple years in public school as well, so we kind of got the best of both worlds. And but we both grew up around a lot of homeschoolers, and his was a very different version of homeschooling than my family was. His was very like more hippies, I guess you could say. And and mine was way more like Christian conservative type of Christian, like homeschoolers.
okay.
And so I had started watching like homeschool YouTube videos, and a lot of the homeschool YouTube videos 10, 12 years ago were big families, and that's kind of changed. I think now there's a lot more YouTube videos just in general, but there was all these like big families. And that was a question that these big family moms always got, was how many kids, where is the number, where do you stop? And the very first time I heard somebody say, we take it one child at a time, and I remember thinking, wait, you can do that? You know, like you don't need to have it like written out that you have a certain number or that you need to like check a certain, obviously, you know, like, but there's just sometimes where you hear those things and they reorient your mind to think a slightly different way. And after we lived in California for our first 3 children, and when my third was it was a very long birth, and I needed more time to just like, I didn't want to do it again, like yet. So we had just moved across the country and we got pregnant really fast. And I was like overwhelmed with the idea of having another baby. Not because I didn't want the baby, but I didn't want to do birth again that soon. And they're 2 years apart, which for some isn't that big of a gap, but my children, the first 2 were 3 years apart and 2.5 years apart. So 2 was like really, really close. And that was the first time that wasn't like, there wasn't like us choosing necessarily the timing in it. And so it was a very much this like eye-opening, heart-opening realization that we aren't always in control over these things. And like I also knew, but it's different when it hits you when it happens like that. It just
Yeah.
changes your perspective a bit. And now that little baby is almost 5, and she is a spitfire, and she does everything in her own time. So there's no doubt in my mind that she wouldn't have, come into our family when she wanted to. So yeah. So I don't
And
know.
also, what's the age gap between your youngest two?
My youngest, 2 years.
Is
Yeah.
it 2?
Yeah, it's 2. We've got, it's a 3. I have a 12-year-old, and then I have a 9-year-old, and then a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 0.
Okay.
Little one. Did I get all of them? I think so. It's hard, like, just saying numbers without
That's right.
saying names, alongside of the numbers.
Well, and
so.
I think also when you told me that your youngest son was going to be, or was having a birthday, I was like, oh, he's 1. And
Yeah,
you texted like, he's 2. And I was
he's
like,
already 2.
no. How is that possible?
Yeah, no, I'm like, they're not that close in age, so praise God that there's.
In my head is just, I guess he will always be a baby, and then you had a baby immediately after.
Yes, I did. We have 4 children, 6 and under, and then sometimes I'm like, why does life feel so chaotic? And it's like, because I have 4 children, 6 and under, I'm like, that's just, it's beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, my husband and I were talking about it just a couple of days ago. It's like, man, life's going to be so boring when there's no toddlers around, because like they're into everything and doing all the things, and they just keep you on your toes, but they're also so funny because they're coming into themselves, so
your kids especially, they're near and dear to Val over here.
Val.
Did you anticipate that you would homeschool, or did you know that was going to be something you would do?
Early on, yes. So both my husband and I didn't have. So we started dating when we were young, and so our version of homeschool, or what we perceived as homeschooling, we were like, we really liked our public school time better, I think, or when we were young.
Yeah.
And then as we got older, it was like, oh, we are like this because we were homeschooled. Oh, this is this opinion or this thought process or the way we go about things because we were homeschooled. And it's not saying that everybody is like that, but it was very true to us, and how we perceived things was very much from our homeschool background. And my husband and I had 2 completely separate homeschool experiences. My husband was unschooled, and I was very traditional workbook homeschooled. And yet we still ended up very, very similar in how we go about things. And I credit that to homeschooling. And so I actually was the one who was like, I think we should homeschool. And I always said that I would never homeschool from when I was like, 16, 17, 18, like young. Yeah. And so my husband's like, what? And so I took a little bit, but now I'm like, I can't imagine us doing anything else. So Lord willing, that's the game plan from now on, Yeah.
And so I mean, you know my story. I swear I would never. Also, when Haley started kindergarten, she was at a private Christian school. First grade, she went to a public school, and we've been homeschooling since she was in the 2nd grade. And the contrast between like bedtime routine, dinner, breakfast, everything became so much better for all of us. Blood pressure, like all the things. Once we started homeschooling, and we weren't like rushing around to get here or there, or
for sure,
finish an assignment.
Yeah, I get that comment a lot of like, I don't know how you can homeschool. And it's like, first of all, I'm not super human with super, calm capabilities that, no. But I also, like, I don't know how you leave your house every day, twice a day, and then or 4 times a day if you're going back home, It's like in the amount of time it takes to just leave and come back, we can do school. And
Yeah.
so like for me in my head, it's like, well, it's actually like an efficiency thing. That's something that's in a family of 6 children, efficiencies is life. And so that's a huge thing, is like just in that time, we could knock out so many subjects in that period of time that you would just take to get ready. And, you know, I'm a homebody, and I like people. I'm an extrovert, but I also need my home time. So I'm like, even like carpool lines and stuff, it's like, I don't know if that's just not, I don't think I could do it. So
Yeah. Same. I mean, you know that. Like,
yes.
Tuesday Val is going to be so mad at Wednesday Val for making those notes.
Why did she do this to me?
But you talked about efficiency and stuff, and
Mm.
this is something that I think that you are so great at. You've got like lots of systems, and you are trying new systems to always try to fine tune kind of the flow of your household.
For
One
sure.
thing we haven't touched on yet is you have 6 kids and you homeschool, but you also have cows and pigs and chickens and
Yes.
plans. And so talk to me about this and how that all plays a role in your life.
So we do have all of those things. So we have just a small, I don't know, little homestead, I guess is what we call it, and we run like a raw milk herd share and sell eggs and pork and all the little things, and it's just kind of a part of daily life, I guess, that I don't do it all. My children help, and we pay them. So they like, where kids would have like an allowance, I guess, we don't do an allowance. We pay for animal jobs. And like, I'm not going to pay my children to do the dishes or the laundry or make their beds and get dressed. Those are things that you will always have to do for the rest of your life. But
yeah,
the animals are an extra, and they provide for our family, but you also are helping take care of them. And so we pay our children to help maintain these things. And so we kind of have a system for whose job, like the oldest, and then it moves down. I do all the cow stuff at this point, but at some point, I'm sure my 12-year-old daughter will take it on at some point. And my 12-year-old does everything care-wise, pig food for the pigs. And then my 9-year-old does everything for the chickens. And then we're in the process of trying to like move everybody up a little bit. And then our 6-year-old is slowly starting to take over the chickens. And then the 4-year-old, she does the dog. So everybody's got a little part of all of it. And but I don't have to do any one of it. Yes, my husband and I are monitoring and making sure that things happen the way they're supposed to. But for the most part, these jobs are fully theirs, and they get to decide how it happens and who. My 9-year-old cleans out the chicken coop, and he collects the eggs multiple times a day and feeds them and gets them water, and my daughter takes care of the pigs, makes sure that they have enough mud on the hot days and thawed water in the middle of winter, and we don't do any of those things even when the weather is poor. So we live in the middle of South Dakota, if it's -40 wind chill, we're all going out together and taking care of those animals, because it's each one of our own job. So
yeah,
all kinds of fun stuff.
I get to a point where I'm like, I'm just going to do it myself because it needs to get done and I want it done right. For sure. And then also we get to a point where I'm told the chicks need more food, and I'm like, what does that mean? And that means I didn't have any to feed them today. Like, okay, that's more than the chicks need food. That's like, they're going to die if we don't run to town.
Yeah, because 2 days ago they may have run out and I forgot to say stuff. And we have those moments. Like we totally do. But it's a constant learning for us as supervisors and as them as workers. And I mean, my oldest, she did chickens for years. And I guess what's nice is, like, because we've been doing this for a little bit, you can kind of see the age pockets where they tend to have a little bit more issue in the, like, it's a developmental milestone to be able to like look at something and go, those are problems at coming up. Or, there's this much food left in the bag or in the bear, whatever you're using, there's this much food left. I should tell somebody. Like that is very much a developmental milestone that clicks at different times for different children. And I think because we've kind of moved past that with at least one, like I can see it's like the same issues at the same ages. And that's a benefit of having so many kids, is that things don't stress me out like they used to, because it's not a me issue. It's not a child issue. This is a pocket of time that, their brain's growing. They're focusing on like something else is trying to grow, and they can't do the two things at one time. So something kind of has to give. Like, am I making sense? Like
you're making total sense, but you also said something that I think is going to make that record squeaking noise in the heads of moms listening right now, because you said, I wish I could remember exactly. Let's rewind the tape. I don't stress out like I used to because I have so many kids. Like, that's kind of a counterintuitive statement. And I love that you said that.
Yeah. Well, and it's, first of all, I don't have the time or energy to stress out about little things. But the big part of it is I've done this so many times that you can see, oh, this is a developmental leap. Oh, this is like we, as moms, I feel like you see so much of it in like out online about like, oh, sleep regressions at like 4 months old. There's a 4-month-old sleep regression. Everybody knows about the 4-month-old sleep regression. But that happens forever, just in different ways, in different regressions. And different children have a tendency to struggle in certain areas. And when their brain is growing, they'll step back in a regression. And in whatever area is their struggle area. And this, I don't think this is just for me and my children, because I've talked to other moms about it. But it's because I've seen it over and over again. Like that toddler going and climbing up on all the things. It's like their brain has leaped. And so it's like almost like they can't help themselves, but kind of do the naughty thing. But it's not naughty, because it's like they can't do the two things at once. They can't quite do all the right things at one time,
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
I wish we would have had this conversation. I mean, I'm glad we didn't, because now I'm recording it and it's amazing. But I could sit and talk about this all day, I think. So I want to ask you, how many of your children were born in a hospital?
1.
How many were born in a birthing center?
1.
How many were born at home?
4.
Yep. Okay. That's perfect. I didn't even know the answers. Oh.
Yep. Three were born in this house, which is pretty neat, I guess. To myself, I think it's neat.
So tell me, I think this is funny, because you said your husband's homeschool style was more hippie and yours was more like Christian, and I'm like, well, that's funny, because I call myself the Christian hippie homeschooler. But how did you come to the decision of home birth?
Well, it's a long story. So like cliff notes. Okay.
Yes.
So actually my husband's sister had 3 home births, and I wanted to be a nurse, to be a nurse midwife one day. But I wanted to be a nurse midwife in a hospital was like always my goal. And then I never got there. But then this exposure to my husband having a sister who had home births, and I was just like, ooh, no, that's not okay. And so we had our first in a hospital, and just the way that everything went sent me into research mode, I guess. She was born perfectly healthy. I had I would consider it a very normal hospital birth. very normal. There was nothing bad or wrong, like nothing happened outside of the normal.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not the way that I had envisioned it. And I wanted an unmedicated hospital birth. And I was like, I can do that. And then my water broke before labor started. And so I got Pitocin, and then the Pitocin led to an epidural, and then the epidural led to D cells and heart rate and all the things. And then she was born, and the nurse was like, you were lucky that you didn't end up with a C-section. And those words to me was like, lucky I didn't end up with a C-section. It stuck with me. And it was like, I'm a researcher. I love to research all the things.
Yeah.
And so it was like, well, how did people do this for lots and lots and lots of years? And it was like, just sent me down, information rabbit trails, and got me looking into home birth. And I looked into it for a couple of years. And then we decided, like, let's do the whole home birth center. The next child, we decided to do a birth center birth. And it was like an hour away from our house, but we were up in the mountains, and the hospital was down the mountain regardless. So you would have to go down the mountain to have a baby. And so we were like, the birth center is, there's 4 different hospitals right around this birth center, to where it's like safer, in my head, safer. And so, like, for that next step away from a hospital birth. And we got there, and he was born within 10 minutes. So we just barely got there. And then where we lived was 6,500 foot elevation, and we had to get all the way down to like 1,100 foot elevation. And it's a 20-minute drive down the mountain, and then another 45 minutes in traffic to get to where the birth center was. And so we were like, it probably isn't the wisest decision to do another time. And so we were like, well, let's try a home birth. Let's see what that looks like. Because the birth center was basically just somebody else's home. They had, it was not attached to a hospital. There's not a NICU or anything. If there is an emergency, you are transferring care and going to a hospital as if you would going from home elsewhere. And so that was where we decided for our next one. And my next 4 have all been born at home, and as long as I'm healthy and baby is healthy, I believe that's a very healthy place to be. So at home.
That's amazing. And also amazing how it worked out that I asked the question in the order that I did.
Yeah.
I love that. We'll get back to our conversation, but first, a note from our sponsor. We are sponsored by another podcast called What You Didn't Expect in Fertility, Pregnancy, and Birth, Real Stories, and Expert Insights. It's a show for anyone who has taken the giant leap into pregnancy and encountered things along the way that they didn't expect. We hear how other people manage their unexpected challenges, from emergency C-section to preeclampsia and everything in between. We also learn from doctors and therapists who share insights about what we do and don't know about this enormous transition. If you're looking to better understand something you experienced in fertility, pregnancy, birth, or postpartum, join us. A recent popular episode is What Birth Trauma Can Look Like After Time to Reflect, Alexis's Birth Story, Part 1. You can find the link for this podcast and sponsor down in the description below. And now, back to our episode. So, obviously, I say obviously, but again, you and I talk every day.
Yeah.
Let's say that in today's culture, in today's society, that you would be considered what? Not mainstream, but the word that you would be considered is being elusive to me right now. Fringe. That's the word.
Okay.
Fringe?
Okay. I kind of like the whole like countercultural, like I feel like my life is kind of, 5 years ago possibly, but I feel like it's becoming way more of a mainstream
Right.
thing, you know?
Right.
When I chose home birth for the first time, it was like, I can't believe how many eye rolls and stares that I got. Or, I know, like, oh yeah, we buy 98% organic foods. And it's like, oh, you're those people. And it's like,
Yeah.
and you know, and like that, or you have raw milk, like what? And it's like, it's fascinating because to me, that 10 years ago, 12 years ago, that was this like, oh, I'm just countercultural. And it's changing, times are changing, and how people perceive me is like, I get way more people now who are like, hey, I'd love to hear your opinion on things. And it's like, well, I've got opinions, so if I mean, if you ask me a poignant question, I will give you an opinion. So
Yeah.
but it's just that, just an opinion.
So I was going to ask you then too, and I think that you're right, and I'm right in that same lane where 5-10 years ago,
because crazy
Fringe would have
crunchy,
probably been, it's like, they're those people. Whereas
yeah,
now you just hear about this kind of stuff more and more. I don't want to say it's gaining popularity because it's not a popularity thing,
for sure,
but that people are just finding that it makes more sense for them.
for sure,
and that it's not as scary as maybe they heard once upon a time. And I'm talking about homeschooling, home birth, homesteading, all the home things.
Yep.
But in that time, and maybe even today, do you find it difficult or challenging to relate or to find a circle with moms that you can be like, we are on the same page in that? Has that been difficult?
Yes and no. And we live in a very weird little town that is like, so I'm coming from California. We were in a small area. We had been in mostly small areas in California. And in that, people are just different, I guess. In the like, yes, there were homeschoolers, but people kept to themselves a whole lot more than they do here in this tiny little place. People it's like they seek out community more. Like, our homeschool community is better here, and like, people, they want to be in community with each other. And so it's been a lot easier to find my people here than elsewhere. I also feel, I guess, a little bit less desperate than I used to. When I had just tiny littles, I wanted to be out of the house with my children. Like, I wanted to go and do things with friends and find people and talk to people. And I just don't have that same time. So the people who I do have in my life, I cherish them and talk to them when I can. But it's not an easy thing to find people. And I think what I'm struggling today is because so many people are so like curious about the way that I live my life. There's a lot of like surface level relationships as opposed to like deep connections on stuff. Like, you and I have a lot of things that like we have come to our own opinions on things separate from each other. So then when we come together, it's like, oh yeah, like these are our own formed opinions. Whereas like people who are newer to these ideas are like, it almost feels like, oh, I want to be like you. And it's like, I don't want you to be like me.
Oh,
I want, like, I can tell you how I got here, but that's not going to be relevant to you in your life with your 2 children in town, with my 6 children out in the country.
That's one thing that I've always appreciated about you, and this is one way for sure that you and I are different, is because if something works for me, I know it will work for everybody, and I am going to tell them that it will work for them, and I'm going to be really excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have always approached it, I mean, as long as I've known you, you've always approached it as, this is what we do, and your situation is different, and here's why.
Yeah.
And I've always appreciated about that, where I'm like, did you did you smell this essential oil? It's so amazing. You're going to love it. And then they vomit
I
or
think,
something.
yeah. Well, and I think it's so funny because we live in, there's just so many opinions out there. And because we have so many kids, I've tried so many different things, right? Like I was in the early days of mothering looking for the perfect organizing system, the perfect cleaning system. Like if I can just figure out this, my house will always be clean. If we can get the schedule just perfectly, I can my children will always make their beds every morning. They will always want to get dressed and brush their teeth and like good habits from the get-go. Then we won't have to worry about those things. And it's like the longer I do this and the more children that you do this, the more I realize that things really only work for but a season. And so I can see that in my life. I definitely can't take my seasonal living and then take it, say, and like, oh yeah, this is totally going to fix all of the problems in your life because it only worked for like 3 months in mine, you know? So.
Okay, but listening to you talk and share about it, though, it totally makes sense to me why when people talk to you, they want to be like you because you're just approaching it in a very practical, like level-headed, you know, kind of free-thinking.
Well, there's so many opinions out there, and everybody's got the cure-all, and there's just not a cure-all. You have to figure out what works for you in that season for that child. And I feel like if more people approached it that way, people would feel less stressed instead of trying, was it a square peg in a round hole. It's like it's that, and we're doing that in so many areas of our life that we don't even realize that we're doing it, especially as moms. You know, oh, her home is clean. Look at how clean her house is, especially with social media. Then like her house is so clean in that picture. It's beautiful. And it's like, while we know that there's probably stuff on the sides, you can't see the sides. And so you internalize just that beautiful little snapshot, even when you're not trying to. And so I think that it works the same way in the like wanting the perfect system and wanting the clean, you know, how to clean the house and how to do all the things. And it's like, you have to constantly be changing it is how you do those things, you know? Yeah.
So when people approach you that maybe they're exploring, I don't know, exploring homeschooling, exploring homesteading or certain aspects of it, do you kind of engage with them as like, how would I ask this? Do you kind of engage them as like, that's cute, they're exploring, you know, I'll let them say their piece, but I'll steer them kind of with my experience? Or do you kind of engage with them as, this person has a lot of similar interests as I do, and I'm really going to like pursue this? Or does it just depend on the person and the exchange?
It definitely depends on the person. And I have learned to ask a couple of other little follow-up questions to see, are they genuinely asking for my advice or opinion or help, or are they just wanting to talk, you know? Because I think there's a difference. There's a lot of people who it's like, oh, this is so cool and this is what's going on in my head, and they just want to be able to share. And this is where I've had to learn to just bite my tongue and go, wow, that's really cool. That sounds like a great idea. And it's not in a passive way. I genuinely I mean that, you know, like I mean those things. But you can also tell when somebody is perceptive to information, or when somebody they just want to, it's almost like they're working things out in their own head out loud. And because you understand it, or at least understand some of the like the verbiage and whatever thing it is, they're like, oh, I can talk to you about it. And it's like, cool. I love to talk about these things. Talk all you want, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's fun. It's fun to talk about those things. And I like to listen to people talk about those things. It's even more fun to like engage with somebody, but not everybody wants to engage, you know?
Right. So that's a really good point, to not only be perceptive of what they're saying, but why they're really saying it.
Yeah.
So do you feel like your motherhood journey in this, because you approach things so practically and pragmatically, has motherhood had a lot of surprises or curveballs for you, or are you kind of like,
Mm.
okay, this is what we're doing now, I guess we'll approach it this way?
I think in the curveballs is more of the each child is just so different. And if you really get to know each child individually, you can see just how different they are. And um, one overarching discipline doesn't work, one um, technique for reading, one math curriculum, like one, yet again, in that idea of if I can just figure out the perfect system. This was in so many facets of my life. Like my whole 20s was I can just figure out the perfect system. And discipline and, you know, steering children towards God and, all of those different areas, it was all in that same thought process, finding the perfect thing, and then realizing that it is so much, so individual, and every single child is so different, and being able to really get to know each child, each personality, each heart, that realizing that they each need something different from me. And it's a constant refining of me
Mm.
because they each need something different of me. And because I am, both my husband and I are way more like logical and less emotional, having a child who needs more emotional is stirring up in me having to be more emotional and having to connect in a way that might not be the most comfortable. So yeah, it's like totally refining me in this whole new area, or a child who needs me to look straight into his eye and be able to connect with him, and so that we can have a conversation about why things are happening. Because if I escalate anything, oh, he's just going to match me, It's like,
Mm.
oh, I have to learn to bring myself down. And it's like, but this is totally different than the sister or the brother or the other child, because they're all
Yeah.
just so different. But it's me who is learning how to parent each one, which is also teaching me to be a better person just in general. So yeah, I don't know.
My word. Would you write a book or something, please?
In all my spare time.
Right. So tell me about then how the Lord has kind of stirred in your heart that your role, your what's the word I'm looking for? Your purpose in this season right now
Mm.
is being at the center of your home. How did that come about, and what does that mean?
Mm. Ooh, that's a really good question. So I as Christians, I think God gives us each a um gives gives us God wants us to be a part of his church, and being in community with each other, and being able to help that community grow, that community for God, for Christ, for his kingdom. It was laid upon my heart very early on that my role was to be mothering the people within my home, and to not be going outside and helping out at daycare and in nursery and at Wednesday night Bible study or mother's group or any of these things. It was very early on. I felt it in my heart that my mission was here in my home with these hearts. And um, I don't know. It was so clear that I just never questioned it, I guess. Like, it wasn't like, it makes it really easy to not step outside of that when it just feels like that's the only place that I should be. So,
Mm.
and I don't know if that answered the question or not, but
Well, have you, I guess, continued to be confirmed in that then? Like,
yeah, definitely. And I don't know, I guess it's interesting for you to ask me that question, because I don't even think about it anymore. Like in the early days, it was like an intentional choice to stay home. And now it just is, and there's been in different ways where I've tried stepping outside of the box, I guess. And I kind of got into, it's silly, but like a year or so ago, I made an Instagram, and I was like, I'm going to put my homestead stuff out on Instagram and see what happens. And it was like, I'm going to give it a year. And if I can hit 1,000 followers in a year, I'll keep going with it. And it was just like posting motherhood, I don't know, posting my life, all the things here. And over the last couple of weeks, I've been kind of stepping away more and more and stepping away more and more. Life is just so full when you have 6 children and a dairy cow and pigs and chickens, and it's full. And it's like I can take my spare moments and put them into the hands of somebody else. I could try to teach somebody else how to do something that I'm doing, or I can teach my children those same things. And I just felt very called to not like shut out, I feel like it's so easy to be like, I'm done with social media. Never again am I going to do these things, but it just to step back and go, what are the intentions? Is there somebody here who needs me more? Is there somebody here in my home who could benefit more from me teaching these skills that I'm posting about, or things that I'm doing and posting about? And so yes, it is I need to check back into my mission is here. This is where my focus should be, my heart should be. And if it's not that you can't share and keep your heart at home, I am struggling in the being in 2 places at one time. And it's probably because having a little person, it changes things. So I don't know, it draws me back in a little bit of like, okay, my time is important. Where's my time going? How am I using my time? Is posting on Instagram the best usage of my time? And it's like, today? No, it's not. In 6 months? Maybe,
Yeah.
But today, the diaper changes and the dirty laundry and all those things are, they're important. So
I appreciate the transparency in that answer. And I think that you laid it out so well, because I do feel like there are several moms, even who I've spoken to on the podcast, who have that desire to kind of focus more on their home, but it feels countercultural, to go back to what we were saying earlier.
For sure.
It feels like they're being torn or pulled between 2 different worlds. And when they try to explain it, they maybe don't have the words outside of, this is just what I feel like I'm supposed to do. And that's not good enough for, whoever they're talking to, or maybe even to them when they say it. So thank you for just being so.
I think too, we moved here. We moved here, right? Like, so when we moved, we chose how we reset up our life here. And I think when you talk to people who've been in an area for 20 years or their entire life, it's like, oh, well, how do I pull away from a church I've always been involved in? Or how do I, set new boundaries with family or friends that I've never set those boundaries with before? So for us, it was like, well, it's kind of easier because we moved to a new place. We kind of got to dictate how we wanted to reorient our life, And so I think somebody who's been in an area with the same people, like that can be even harder, because then now you're having to go to those people and go, I love you, but I'm needing to reset some new, relationship standards, I guess, or,
Boundaries.
Interactions. Yeah. Boundaries with people.
Yeah.
And
I feel like, as we're wrapping up here, what would you say to a mom who doesn't know what her plan is, but she knows she wants to have one? And she's just trying to balance like maybe what the Lord is stirring on her heart with maybe what she already has going on and doesn't know how to make the two worlds come together. What would you say to encourage that mom?
I think my biggest advice or encouragement is to give yourself time and space. And you, as a mom, as a wife, as, a relative of anybody around you, if you are going in 50 million directions so frantically, you can't make a decision that's worth anything. And so I think my biggest encouragement is that it's okay to give yourself time to step back away, to say no, and to reevaluate the way things are going today. And that even if it's just for a season, it's okay to make decisions for just a season, because life is cyclical and seasonal, and stepping back for a moment is okay, especially if you're wanting to be true to what God is calling you to do. I really believe that God talks to us in the stillness, and we have to give him the opportunity to really communicate with us. And our phones and relationships with other people outside of our homes make us so busy these days that you don't have time to think and pray and to talk to God. So I don't know. I think that's what I would say. Give yourself some space and time.
I would concur. That's great advice. Erica, thank you for being my friend, but also for coming on the Motherhood Experience podcast. This was fun.
Thank you for having me, Val.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Facebook or Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.